Hello, class. Today we are going to be discussing the novel that we read, which is The Bluest Eye, and we are going to be discussing as well the film that we just watched, which is Their Eyes Were Watching God. I want to know if anybody had a favorite character from the novel. Great, great. Okay, and so what did you like about Claude? Great, thank you, Sophia. Anybody else had a character that they liked from the novel? Piccola, yes. She was actually the main character in the novel, correct? So we're going to be focusing on first the main characters of the novel and the film. But first, let's go ahead and discuss the novel. So our main character here is Piccola. And she is a young girl, right? And right now, the time that they're living through, can anybody tell me the era or what's going on through this novel? They're going through the Great Depression. Yes. Okay. So that means a lot of people are struggling financially. There's a lot of things going on outside of the financial state of people. I think people at this point are just trying to survive, trying to get through. So, okay, so the question is, what role does race play in the novel of The Bluest Eye? What does race have to do, or how does it affect Piccola in the novel? Does anybody have an idea on how exactly, or can anybody tell me the race of Piccola? Right, she is an African American. Let's write that down because that's important. So the race that plays in the novel is African American. Now, was being an African American easy in the Great Depression? Right, I don't think it was easy for them at all. I think things are looking better for them now in our world, but back then, African Americans were treated very inhumane, right? So being that Piccola was an African American, how did it affect her? How did it affect her? She was looked down upon. By who? By her classmates, her family, and also her community. Right? Because when she would go to the store, she would get stares, and it was really because of the color of her skin. And she knew that. She sure did know. Anything else that affected Piccola because she was an African American? Abuse, yes. So I feel like Piccola, being that she was an African American at this time, her abuse wasn't really taken seriously, because as an African American, she had to submit to the fact that there was no help for them. There was no help. Her mother was very ignorant, as we read on the book. She was ignorant when Piccola would try to explain to her sexual abuse that she was suffering from her father, from Charlie, right? So let's go ahead and write deal. She had to deal with abuse alone. Piccola, in other words, she didn't have a voice, right? So we can also write that here because, as we all know, African Americans really did not have a voice in our past. So let's go ahead and write this here. People didn't really take them seriously. You know, they were really used for what? For work, yes. People would, slavery was still a big deal at that point. So let's go ahead and write, she had no voice. Great, so this is how race affected Piccola. Now let's move on over to the film. Did you guys like the film? So the film was quite interesting. Our main character was who? Our main character for the film was Jane, right? Now Jane was also an African American, right? That was her race. African American. She was also a young girl, but not as young as Piccola, right? So Jane, how did race affect her in the movie? Being that she was an African American, how did that affect her? So Jane, to start off with, she didn't have any parents, right? So she was living with her grandmother. Now, the thing is, everybody was very poor, obviously, because we were also living through trying to survive the Great Depression. So what Jane's grandmother did was arrange a marriage, right, with an old man, and he had a large farm, and that would be good for Jane because obviously they were poor and that was her only way out. So being that she was an African American, she had no choice. She had no choice. So she had an arranged marriage. And that was Jane, being an African American, she had to start helping around the farm. And she didn't like it. She was fed up with it. So what she did was she ran away and she remarried. She remarried a man with money, and this man became the mayor, right? So she thought it was all nice and dandy, but the thing is that the relationship with the mayor, what happened? Since she was a black woman, right? Jane once again, did not have a voice. The mayor wanted to control her, control the way she dressed. She was limited. She was limited to express herself. Jane couldn't be herself. After a while, the mayor just wanted to completely control her. She couldn't speak with her friends the same way and stuff like that. After that, the mayor again was physically abusing her, right? That's what set in fear to Jane. So right here, like Piccola, she had to deal with abuse as well, which that abuse was sexual abuse. But that abuse was from her father, right? Piccola. Now, Jane had to deal with physical abuse. From her husband. And again, Jane, she couldn't speak up about it. People saw her get hit, and they didn't do anything about it. Nobody could defend her. Why? Because He was the mayor. He was the top authority of the town. And she was also a woman and she was black, so she had no voice. I'm going to write that down as well here on Jane's, just like we did on Pecola, because it truly was a problem with race back then. Nowadays, do you feel like black women have more of a voice? Right, slowly but surely, everybody's gaining respect. Yes, so we're gonna go ahead and put no voice here as well. So this right here is our discussion of the main characters from the novel and from the film. And this is exactly what being an African American affected Pecola and what affected Jane. Okay, so next we're gonna do a different activity where we're gonna go ahead and compare. We're gonna compare Pecola and Jane. We're gonna compare what they had the same. Either it was events, either it was characteristics, stuff like that. So let's go ahead and move on to our next activity. Okay, class, so for this next activity, we're going to be comparing the characteristics between Pecola and Jane, which is Pecola's from our novel, and Jane is our main character from our film that we watched. So, can you tell me something that Pecola and Jane have in common? So yes, they're both African American. Now, I'm going to need you to list 3 more similarities and 4 differences for Pecola and 4 differences for Jane. Okay, so can you tell me, is there something else that Pecola and Jane have similar? Yes, they were both surrounded by dysfunctional relationships. Dysfunctional relationships. Anything else that is similar between Pecola and Jane? It took place at the same time, right? It took place in the Great Depression. And another thing that they have similar is that they were both looked down upon. They were both looked down upon their communities as and family. Communities as, their neighbor. Now let's go ahead and list some differences between Pecola and Jane. We can conclude that Pecola was younger than Jane, right? Pecola was said to be about 12 years old, so we're going to say she was younger and Jane was older. Another thing that's different from Pecola and Jane is that what dysfunctional relationship did Pecola have? With who? With her father, right? So let's list here, she had an abusive relationship with her father. On the other hand, Jane had an abusive relationship with her husbands. With her husbands. Because remember, Jane was married almost 3 times. but every relationship she had its downfalls, right? Something else that they had a difference in. Do you remember what Piccola thought was beautiful? Does anybody remember? Right, she thought white was beautiful, right? Piccola, she thought white was beauty. Unlike herself, right? Because she was an African American. And through the whole novel, she keeps referencing back to Shirley Temple, which is the doll, right? The blue eyes, the blonde hair. On the other hand, Jane. Did Jane think the same as Piccola? I feel maybe Jane thought that herself, she was beautiful, right? But she was always talked down about it from her husbands, you know. Like she had said in the film, that she would have to be someone else on the outside rather than the inside, right? So I feel that Jane saw beauty within herself, but couldn't justify it due to her environment, right? So let's go ahead and write, she thought that her inner self was beauty. Okay, can I have one more? The last difference that we find between the two is that Piccola always wanted to change herself, right? Piccola always had a vision of that she could be a better person, or her life would be better if she had blue eyes, you know, white, blue eyes, just like the doll from Christmas, right? So, but Jane, she never wanted to change anything from herself. She loved herself. But the thing with Jane was that everybody around her always wanted to change her. Okay, so right here with Piccola, let's go ahead and put wished to be someone else. Or we could also say no self-love, right? Someone else. No self-love. Now, Jane, others always wanted to change her. Lots of self-love. So this completes our comparison activity. After this, we're going to go ahead and do one more. But go ahead and finish writing this down. And let's move on to the next activity. Okay, class, so for the third activity, we're going to be analyzing our characters, which first let's start off with Piccola. This is Piccola. On your papers, you can draw Piccola as you envision her as you were reading the novel. I'm going to go ahead and do a stick figure because that's what I do best. So, Piccola, let's go ahead and analyze first her idea of beauty. I know it sounds like we're repeating ourselves, but at the end of the book, towards the end of the story, what do you feel that Piccola's true vision of beauty? Shirley Temple, right? So let's go ahead and write her thought of beauty, right? This one's for beauty. Beauty is going to be blue eyes, like Shirley Temple. That was her idea of beauty, right? Now, this heart right here, this broken heart, is going to represent her dysfunctional relationships. So her dysfunctional relationships, what did they consist of, right? She did have a dysfunctional relationship with her father, also with her mother, and I believe also within her community, her classmates, also people, the stores she would go to, she would just always frowned upon, right? And she would always think it's because of the color of her skin. So here, let's go ahead and put first, we're gonna go ahead and write sexual abuse, right? This is the dysfunctional relationships. And here we're gonna put sexual abuse. I would say verbal abuse, right? And they would always belittle her, huh? So she was also constantly, and lastly, let's analyze her true identity. Piccola's identity. Her true identity, I believe, would be she was so brave. She was such a brave young girl to have gone through all these things, right? Because everyone would spill all their ugliness on her, right? All the ugly that they would just spill it on Piccola. So she was very, very brave to have gone through all of that, right? So let's go ahead and put here brave, because she survived all of that. Yes, she will always suffer and want the blue eyes, right? Like Shirley Temple, but her true identity is that she is a very, very brave young girl to have encountered all of those things. So let's move on to Jane. Let's go ahead and analyze Jane now. Okay, class, so for Jane, what was the beauty for Jane? Can we analyze what beauty was for her? Beauty for Jane, I believe, was herself. Self-love. Self-love. And she also saw beauty in love itself, right? Because she tried to see the beauty in her husbands that she encountered in the film, but at the end of the day, they all turned out dysfunctional. So let's also put here in beauty is love. She wanted to love, but people didn't let her love the way she wanted to, because they always wanted to change Jane, right? They always wanted to change her. Now, for Jane, she also had verbal abuse, right? Like Piccola. She also went through the verbal abuse as a dysfunctional relationship that she had with her husbands. Because they would always want to make her feel small, like if she was unworthy, you know. And also, she went through physical abuse. Perfect example is the mayor, right? Also, T, when at the end, when he had the rabies, stuff like that. Compared to Piccola, where she was sexually abused by her father, right? Let's go ahead and put here physical abuse. And I believe that Jane was also belittled. Yes. Now, what do you think was Jane's true identity? Her true identity was to be independent, right? She truly always wanted to be independent, but they would talk her out of it. She was always running away. She always wanted to run away, but she couldn't because they would talk her right back into it, right? Self-doubt. They would talk self-doubt into Jane. She was an independent Black woman. That's what she really, truly wanted to be. And she wanted freedom. Freedom. So this right here, we can conclude that Jane saw beauty in herself, went through these dysfunctional relationships, and at the end of the day, she wanted to be an independent and have her freedom as an African American woman. And that is the end of our activities. Thank you so much for joining me in class today. Thank you.